which, you know, plus or minus is when you probably will harvest them or graze them or that type of thing. Millet's 50 to 60% moisture. And just as a reference, as you guys are well aware, you know, stalks are going to be somewhere in that 10 to 20% moisture. Okay? So the big thing here is understanding the carbon to nitrogen ratio. If you want to plant brassicas and you want to get any type of animal performance, you know, a high carbon to nitrogen ratio is going to mean it's less digestible, but you can also go too far the other way where it's so digestible it just goes right through them. And that's typically what you see with the brassicas. So if you want a specific level of animal performance, you're going to have to add more dry matter into that deal. Otherwise, they just won't do very well. Okay, half a pound a day or something like that on weaned calves, which is not necessarily what you read in the popular literature, but then they're not very clear about what species those animals were grazing, and they don't make the point that whether they do well or do poor, a lot of it has to do with dry matter concentration in the diet. Cold tolerance obviously is going to be important, and this is just kind of a comparison on a index level of cold tolerance in these different species. You can see that the brassicas and the cereals are going to be quite cold tolerant, as I'm sure you're aware. They'll stay green well into this time of year before they finally freeze out and start to desiccate a little bit. The sorghums, Sudan grass, and hybrids, no cold tolerance at all. Now, if it even thinks about frosting, they brown up, they die, they're done. There's still some grazable material there, but of course your forage quality goes way down. So a lot of first time in the cover crop deal, they get convinced to plant a millet or something like that, and they're going to graze it after frost. Obviously that probably doesn't work out real well because everything's green except the millet, which died at the frost. So you can get a little bit of disappointment there. And then the residue, which we were talking about a little bit earlier. So this is a series of studies that were compiled to look at harvest efficiency, which is the amount of material that actually went into the animal, and that's represented by the yellow bars, and then how much they wasted. Now by wasted, that means they trampled it, they just didn't eat it, whatever, but it didn't go into the cow. And that's represented by the red bars. And so you can see it makes a big difference just based on species, as you probably had guessed. Okay, and you look at something like annual ryegrass, you can see that they'll clean that off pretty tight. Okay, there's not going to be a lot of wastage there. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Sudan grass, Piper Sudan grass. It's kind of like grazing an oak tree. That's about the quality of the stuff. You know, it's more of a haying or chopping type deal, but you do see a lot of folks that try and graze it, and then they're surprised when they waste 85% of it because it's 14 feet tall, it's starting to dry down by the time they get to grazing it, and you can have some issues that way. So, you know, being aware of the type of residue that a certain, you know, plant species is going to leave is going to be pretty important. So just to give you some ideas in terms of some yields and costs that we've seen in cover crop studies, we've got a brassica mix here. We've got a brassica plus cereal rye. Brassica is an annual ryegrass, and brassica is a German millet. And you can see there's a wide range of yields. Now obviously, right here we had some weather issues, because the one thing you'll run into with brassicas is they are very drought tolerant after the first 30 days from being seeded. Okay, so if you get a little moisture or there is soil moisture available in that first 30 days, they're going to do really good. If you don't, they're not going to do anything, or not much. Okay, so just be aware of that. And as far as cost per acre, you know, obviously on some of these mixes there can be a little bit of sticker shock because it can be a little, you know, it can be pretty high price on a per acre basis to put them in. But when you start looking at that on a cost per ton basis, it starts diluting it down, especially obviously the more tonnage that it produces. And so when you look at cost per cow per month in a grazing type situation, it starts to look pretty reasonable. Okay, and just keep in mind that on the average in Minnesota, it costs about $65 to run a cow in the wintertime, $65 a month. Okay, so I mean, there's some opportunities here in the right situation to cut some of that cost out of there. And so that's where the grazing part of this, there's, you know, guys have noticed that there's some opportunities there and have tried to take advantage of those.
How many, can you go back to that last slide there? So what's your pounds per acre when you're figuring as you go across that cost per acre? How many pounds are you seeding?
Well, it depends on the mix.
Okay, so that's your 126 or 46.
Right here.
Yeah, any of them.
So you're asking what's in that cost?
Yeah. No, how many pounds per acre are you figuring on $126 per acre? How many pounds are you seeding?
Oh, well, okay, so that's including your machine cost, your labor, okay. That's everything. And the seed cost, and the fertilizer, and so on and so forth. Because contrary, I'm glad you brought that up actually, because I about glossed over it. Contrary to popular belief, these things generally do need a little starter fertilizer to get going. Even the ones that are really good at scavenging some nitrogen, they need a little bit to get started or they won't do a whole lot. Okay? And so, yeah, you know, something like a brassica and ryegrass, and we'll talk about some of these seeding rates and costs a little bit more towards the end. It's going to be a little bit difficult to piece that out in this slide here. Like I said on the top end, probably not as prevalent in this area right here, but there are folks that do like to wean calves onto some type of forage. And cover crops fit that little niche pretty nicely if that's something you're interested in. And obviously, alleviating stress is the goal. One thing that's probably important to point out is the literature does not really support that grazing weaned calves is better than a well-managed dry lot system. But some folks, just out of preference, they like to graze those calves right off the cow in the preconditioning type deal, and that's what they do. Okay, so we'll just kind of, you know, it's not real prevalent around here, so we'll go over that. Backgrounding calves, same type of deal. There are some folks that are interested. It's not real prevalent in this country, but it is important. I want to show you this just for the simple fact to demonstrate the importance of the dry matter issue that we talked about kind of towards the front end. If you look at this red block right here, here we've got a brassica mix, and then we've got oats, and then we got millet, and so those were all grown separately and grazed. Okay. And so you could see the difference in animal performance based on those particular species. And a lot of that goes back to the dry matter deal. Okay? Remember, these are 90% water. And they actually didn't do too bad here. But in a lot of situations, I mean, you know, cattle it'll be less than a half a pound a day in terms of actual performance. Okay? But if you start, then what we did is we took some of these and we started mixing and matching at different levels. Okay, so like in this yellow block here, we had 70% brassica and 30% oats, and here's your performance. And then we just flipped it around and did 30% brassica and 70% oats, and you can see the effect that that extra dry matter had on there. Now, you know, on some of these, you see quite a difference in cost as well because, like anything else, you know, good dry matter costs money, okay? But it's still a pretty reasonable cost, and it has a pretty big impact on performance. So, you know, that's really just to demonstrate what's going on there. We did the same thing with brassicas and millet, and, you know, and then we just did a half and half on each of those species and saw basically the same response, okay? So just a few things to keep in mind with the cover crop thing is just a rough rule of thumb. Every 2 weeks after August 1st decreases forage yield by half. Okay? Now that's not to say that you have to have them planted by August 1st. Just understand that whatever you're trying to do, whatever your system is, once you get past August 1st, yields are going to start going down because you're just out of growing season. Okay, the days are getting shorter, the nights are getting cooler, the stuff doesn't grow as much. Last chance to plant down in this country is probably going to be the middle of September at the very latest. Okay, I wouldn't go any bit past probably the 15th of September, or you're probably just wasting your time, because you're not going to get very much.
Unless you're doing a winter cereal.
Unless you're doing a winter
Or
cereal.
spring grazing because it isn't going to grow in the fall.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. The second big thing, just if you're not familiar with some of these things, is seed size. Okay, because you guys have been farming for years and years and years, but it's largely been monocultures. Okay, and a lot of these cover crops, well, you want to put in 2 or 3, 4 species, and all the seed sizes are different. Because a turnip seed, as an example, is about the size of the head of a pin. And then you guys know what like an oat seed looks like and things. So huge difference in seed size. And so, when you go to your dealer to get a cover crop mix, make sure you ask about seed size. Okay, this is kind of a whole presentation in and of itself, so I'm not going to go into it much more than that. But ask about seed size, so you don't have all these different seed sizes mixed together, and then on the back end, your drill isn't really able to meter it out very effectively, because it's just going to meter it out based on the largest seed size. And so typically what you see is the front half of the field is all turnips and the back half is all oats. Okay, because the turnip seed just runs out the drill, and I've seen that a lot, and that's why it is because they weren't aware that the seed sizes were so much different, and they mixed it all together, just threw it in the big box on the grain drill, and away they went. Well, it seeded it, it metered out the oats all right, but the turnip just ran out the bottom of the drill. So just be aware of that. And that's what a lot of these have to do with here. The other thing is, depending on what you're planting, some of these seeding rates can be very, very low. 1 pound, 2 pounds, 3 pounds. Like turnips, as an example, 3 pounds would be a monoculture of turnips. Thick monoculture. Because the seeds are really, really small. How many drills are going to seed at 1 pound to an 8? They're not going to meter that out very effectively. So if you do some type of mix and it's a very low seeding rate is what's recommended, ask your dealer to add a little just filler in there. And they should have some filler on hand. You can use a lot of different things, and bulk that up a little bit to a comfortable rate for the seeder to meter that out, and you'll get a lot better seeding performance there. I don't know if you see that much in this country. If you go to the southeast part of Minnesota, you see a lot more of this. But just blowing cover crop seed on during the growing season, it just sits there and does pretty much nothing all summer until you start getting to dry down. And then once that light comes through the canopy, then those cover crops will start coming, and they can go in and graze that or do whatever afterwards.
So,
yeah,
you're talking about mixing that with fertilizer and just
generally that's
air
what
flowing it on?
Yeah.
If you had an oats field, then if you were looking at putting turnips in there, would that be something that you could put on in the spring with the fertilizer, and that turnip seed would lay there while the oats crop shades it out, and then once you took the oats crop off, you're saying it would germinate?
Yeah, well, it will germinate. If you seed them kind of at the same time, though, I would be a little concerned about competition on your oat yield. Yeah. And that's generally why you're going to put it on mid-season, to make sure that it can't germinate until you get some type of dry down.
Then if that oats was a cash crop, then you'd probably wait till it was off.
Yeah, exactly.
And just go in after.
Any type of cereal grain, I would just go in after, yes. Correct.
That you should be in there within the first 2 weeks of August. You'd
Yeah.
meet your deadline.
Right. And for that type of scenario, you also want to be a little careful of seeding too early, because if the stuff does get up and going, it'll be so rank and mature by the time you get to it, it'll just be useless.
Okay.
Because if it gets up and going, it goes, and it grows fast. The maturity on a lot of these is 45 days. So, I mean, they really get to, depending on what it is, but they generally really get up and going, especially when you're talking like brassicas and things like that. 45 days, they're going, they're big.
I had some success flying seed onto wheat field when it was fully headed out.
Yes.
And it got harvested and the light hit it. I think the moisture condition maybe was a little better down in the wheat canopy than it would be after the harvest.
Sure, absolutely. Yep, you bet. And I don't know it'd be interesting to know what you did. Generally what they recommend is, at least double the seeding rate if you're flying or blowing it on to get the same level of germination. Because obviously you're not going to get the seed to soil contact that you do by drilling it. And so if you want a similar germination rate, you're going to have to put down more seed. Not that there's anything wrong with that, just know that you got to put down more seed to get a similar. So did you increase the seeding rate quite a bit on what you did?
We were just learning. It was
Experimenting,
35
yeah.
Years ago, we had trouble getting uniform pattern back then.
Yeah.
It's another story. But
Yep.
we flew on to standing corn and soybeans this year. We used not an extra rate.
Okay.
And then we were happy with less than a